family structure, methods of parenting. Years ago, Dr. Spock came along and said, and not the one off Star Trek. This one didn't have pointy ears. He came along and said you shouldn't discipline children. It's psychologically damaging, blah, blah, blah. He had all these theories and everything, and all these people listened to him while their kids started acting funny because they weren't being corrected, and that spankings were anathema, evil, too much for them. This was part of Pastor Kinson and I's reminiscing the other day about days in school. First day of school, 7th grade. I'm sitting behind my friend. I'm playing drums with my pencils on my desk. And I was using the back of his head for a cymbal. And he kept doing like that, you know. And so the last time I hit him, and I was making the noise too, you know, the teacher said, "You two, in the hall." We went out in the hall, we're standing there, man, it's the first day of school, you know. And so he came out with a big long board about that wide with a handle on it. He said, "Bend over." So we're, crack, crack. Now get back in there, sit down and mind your business, which we did. It was difficult to sit down on that burning glutei, but we did it. So not long after that, I went down to the restroom down in the boys' room, just for boys. And it was an old brick school with those wire screens. You had to use a big pole to open the windows, to hit the loop and all that. It was like that. And there was this little window in the bathroom. And so we opened up the window. It was a heavy snow day. And there was about 8 inches of snow sitting on the window ledge. So we grabbed that stuff. It was nice and packed. And a snowball fight broke out in the restroom. Snow was flying everywhere. We're blasting each other with these snowballs. And a teacher walks in. So what are you doing? He said, "Wait here. Don't move." He went out. I said, "Oh, no." So me and another guy were still there. Came back, he said, "Grab the sink," had those white porcelain sinks with the cross knobs on them. Crack! Backhanded. Whew. Crack! He whacked us one each. Said, "Now get back to class." We knew he would find us. There were other pranks that kids pulled because they didn't have phones, they didn't have video games. All they could do is just get curious.
So what Kekel is reminiscing about as a good thing is that this teacher's first line of defense was to pull the kids out and to hit them when they're in 7th grade. He did not make it sound like his friend was doing anything wrong, but having a head that he was able to hit with his pencil. So he's reminiscing about a teacher and about a time, and I'm almost 61, and I remember living in Florida for a year when I was in 1st grade, and back then they believed in, it's kind of funny, I had to stop recording because this flock of JWs just descended upon our condo complex. They came by one day when I was really sick recently, and I think she could tell through the door. I didn't know who it was, couldn't see who they were. So I guess they were doing their due diligence by following up. It's just funny because there's a whole bunch of them just everywhere. Okay, so let me try to get back where I was. What I was saying was, we had moved to Florida for a year, and while there, I was in, I think, the second half of 1st grade, and there was actually this tree in the yard of the school that was shaped like a Y, I don't know if they grew it that way on purpose or it was just there and convenient, but they would always put this little kid, his name was PJ Williams. I will never forget it. And PJ, if you're out there, I'm 61 and almost 61. I still think about you, dude. Hope you turned out okay, because you got paddled a lot. Like, I remember thinking at the time, I was petrified. And I behaved when I was in school. And because I got beat at home, so I didn't want to get beat more for not behaving in school. Plus, I just wasn't inclined to misbehave there. But I remember it seemed like for every infraction, they'd pull this kid out. And during gym class, we were outside, and the gym teacher, she put him over the crux of the Y there, and paddled him in front of us. I mean, not only the humiliation and you don't have enough about you as an adult. You don't have any other recourse. That's your first line of defense. And that's what he's telling us here, is this 7th grade teacher's first line of defense, first day of school, first way to handle this is to pull them both out in the hallway. I don't know, maybe the other kid was a player. Maybe he leaned his head over so he could do it, and thereby lending to the whole scenario. I have no idea. But he cracked him, he says twice, right, with a paddle. Does it matter how much something hurts? Anyway, so he's opining about the whole Dr. Spock era, and I remember when that occurred, and I won't comment on that either way because my focus is here in this group, which has a children's church, and which, to best of my knowledge, they do not have, or they didn't ever have, a vetting process. But anyway, so he's cracked. He goes right into saying how even though that occurred, he went into the bathroom and opened up the window and started having a snowball fight. So clearly the spankings worked, right? Being cracked on the butt hurt, really, really affected behavior. So in the whole context of what he's trying to convey is like, oh, the good old days where you just they weren't afraid to discipline you. Really? So you were disciplined, you still continued with the same behavior. The teacher did not have any kind of clear training. Clearly, I will make that assumption. I can't know for sure. I can't go back in time and find out. Man, when will they get those time machines? But this is what he's trying to convey. And so he's telling a group of people in a church service about discipline. And I'm going to tell you something right now. Back in the day when I was there, we would go into Davis's class, and he's the founder of the organization. And he just bellow out all of these things you should be doing. And I will not forget, he taught in a class, and I've heard this from other people too, from previous times prior to when I was in the Bible school. I don't know what they do now, but clearly Kekel has no problem doing it right over the pulpit to everyone. Church, could be church members sitting there. I don't know how many they have. But he's telling them these things. And he wants people he keeps talking about how these pastors are placed there to care for the people, right? To care for their souls, to watch for them, to teach them. And this is what he's teaching. But anyway, back to Davis. He was telling us how we should spank the children. He suggested at the time that you take, I don't even know if they have these hangers still. Like, I don't go bring something to be dry cleaned every week like when we were in the organization. You have to bring men's suits there and some women's dresses. But he said to take that white part off from in between the wire of the hanger and have the child bend over and at the top of the thigh to give some quick lashes. And I tried it on myself. It hurts. It hurts a lot. Now, I was fortunate to have little girls when they were real little that were well behaved. But I have spoken to people recently who in tears were telling me that how much they regret following that advice. A gentleman mentioned that he gave his kids a shellacking all the time because Davis pushed the whole thing about the behavior of the kids and how it's a reflection on the man and on the woman and blah, blah, blah. Part of his teaching was also that how can you pastor a church if you don't even have control of your family? And here we have Kekel teaching, pushing these things as if he knows something from the throne room of God about how you should treat your children and discipline them and raise them. And you're putting more and more and more pressure on these people to make their kids behave, and they're gonna whack them. Maybe they're gonna do it in ways that they grew up with, and that's all they know because of this junk you're saying over the pulpit. It's disgusting. And then you have to wonder what's going on in the children's church. Are they hitting them over there? You have to ask these things. You have to find out what is the policy. I remember back when I was teaching in children's church, there was actually another lady who had the kids who were the age of my daughters. And and they were in the one building, the Lena Limpert. And so if the kids had to go to the bathroom, you had to walk them across the parking lot. And you know, if you live in Washington State, sometimes the weather can be very gnarly, either super windy and rainy. I mean, back in, I think it was 2000 or 2001, I remember counting it from Halloween. It rained for 94 straight days, not without stopping. It did stop here and there. It rained every single day for 94 days. I'll never forget it. And so you had to bring the kids in that weather if they had to go to the bathroom. Well, what this teacher did was she told the kids, whoever doesn't go to the bathroom, at the end of the night, you get candy. So what are kids going to do? They're going to hold it in. And sometimes you're up in service for a couple of hours. So it's disgusting. When I brought it up to Infausto, who was over the children's church at the time, you get a look like, yeah, and it's a matter of you pick up your kid and they went wee-wee a little bit in their underwear because they wanted candy and they obviously sensed the teacher did not want to bring them. You have helpers there. We had to do it all the time for years and years. It's what you did. There was no other way around it. You're there families are going up to church and you're taking care of their children. And you should take care of them, I would think, the way you would want someone else to take care of yours. And so for me, anyone who knows me and knew me back then, I cared about those kids. So it wasn't just about picking up mine and she had a little accident, but it was about, oh my goodness, how many other kids in the class are holding in a bowel movement or something? Just because teachers don't want to walk across the parking lot, then guess what? Don't be in children's church, which you probably didn't even have a choice about, very likely. So it's just, you have to know what's going on. He's telling you over the pulpit, not just what he believes, but what he thinks you should be doing.
There are myths about all of these things. One of them is what I said about Dr. Spock and the kids and the discipline, when the Bible teaches us to discipline them, not abuse. A spanking, those teachers didn't abuse us. They got our attention. It didn't hurt to have our buns warmed. God gave us two big pads to endure the lessons of life. He did. And people today, I mean, they're so caught up in the web of lies, they really think that's a bad idea.
It is a very bad idea to have teachers allowed to spank children, especially little ones. You have no idea who those people are and what their intention is. And clearly, from Kekel's own recollections, this dude, that was his first line of defense. That blows my mind. And yet, it did not stop him from misbehaving. So, tell me again how what you're saying is correct.
Or some kind of horrible thing. And look at what the kids are doing. And they run roughshod over the parents, and the parents won't put them in line and make them sit down. They should make them go to bed at a certain time. Say, all right, this is the time, everybody in bed, get in there. And when mom speaks, they should listen. If they don't, mom is out of control. Not the kid. The kids are never out of control. It's you that's out of control. That's not an old idea. It's a biblical one. And God said, I chasten every son that I receive because I love them.
Just as long as people know, chastening is not just a physical thing. Chasten can be to punish, to speak firmly. There's lots of shades of chastening.
Because I love them. If you don't put them in line and teach them in love and enforce what you say, you teach. And some of you shaking your head and you don't like this because you, Mr. and Mrs. Parent, are caught in the web of deceit.
So here is one of those ways of trying to get some proper behavior from everyone. He demeans anyone who's shaking their head, because you either have to totally agree with Mr. Mike or you're crossed up, or as he says here, you're in the web of deceit. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's correct? Do you think that's a proper way to handle it, a balanced way?
He also has you twisted around to where you've bought into all these ideas as to why that was a bad idea. Well, my dad used to hit me. Well, your dad was an abuser, but that doesn't mean you have to be one. My mom and dad were this, and I don't want to be like them. Good, you don't have to be. You do not have to be what they are.
The interesting thing here in the creepy part is that he throws he just says, you don't have to be like your parents were. You don't have to abuse your kids. Okay, here's the thing. There is no one-size-fits-all throwing this over a pulpit to a mass audience. You cannot do that with anything. It's these broad brush, oh, you either believe this or you don't. You either do this or you're wrong and you're crossed up. You either believe what I'm telling you or you're wrong. And what starts to happen is people don't know they'll go to extremes to be careful. And the kids are going to be the ones that suffer. Actually, the whole family will, especially later on in later years when there's resentment built up. When they leave this cult and they realize we didn't have to do all those things. You can't just spew your stuff over a pulpit and say, everybody put this on, it fits everyone. You would have to sit down and talk with people and know them and know what they're about and advise accordingly. That's why there's people who spend years studying things on how to help people. And you just think because you're called of God that you can just read a verse in a Bible and say, this is for you. This is for you and you and you and you and you. It's all the same. It doesn't take into account the kids. It doesn't take into account the parents. None of it. It's wrong. It's so morally, ethically wrong.
That is the leadership of God that you guide as the head and king of your kingdom. And your wife is the queen. And you rule together, not the kids. Kids don't get to rule. They're not king or queen. See, I told you our church is different. We have not abandoned all these good, wholesome ideas of God. Not as a church anyway, but we have some in here who claim to be ministers who have. They're caught up in the web of lies and are deceived. And you can tell because their kids are not in subjection with all gravity.
So here's the thing about this. Kekel's going to judge everything going on by kids, right? Probably not understanding, since his child got to do everything the other kids did not. He got to go and play football. He got to go to soccer camp. He got to go to a private school. And it really doesn't matter what kind of school you go to. But he was able to. He was able to because he and his wife were not under the same kind of time constraints as everyone else. Not only that, but we could talk about the happiness and joy level that increases as I honestly don't know what the young man thought when he saw. He had to know from the other kids that they did not get to do the same thing. All these things that were taught against, right? But going further, there was an aspect of the whole situation with the Kekels having a child, okay, among all the other children. Because if he was in children's church or at someone's house being babysat, who was the person that was going to tell the Kekels, your son didn't behave well? So should we have judged him and Tanya to not have been doing well based on the behavior of their son? No one would do that, because most of us knew you feel bad for the kid because no one's telling him not to do something or correcting him because they don't know. There's an unfairness to it. But who was going to be the person to do it, especially with Davis? He would be livid, totally livid. I mean, there are stories. There are so many stories. But you get the idea. You're hamstrung. And here he is as the gall, the unmitigated gall. Is that a thing? To get up over the pulpit and to tell people how he is judging them and who and what they are and their value as parents, as a preacher, based on the kids, when he has no idea about the pressures and about the awkwardness and all the things the kids go through. You know, when I was in children's church, I'll never forget this. And this is how, when teachers, when preachers take upon themselves to start, diagnosing from the pulpit, diagnosing from a classroom desk. A parent, this couple brought their son in. He was probably about 8 years old. And they're like, he'll probably give you trouble. He has ADHD. I said, really? Well, I was thinking, I don't need to know that. He's just a kid, whatever. They were saying it right in front of him. So they were almost giving him license to misbehave. But I said, well, what has he been diagnosed? And they said, oh, the teacher told us in school. Ah, the teacher told you. Okay, that's as bad as a preacher telling you over a pulpit like this. And at the end of the class, I noticed this kid was super duper smart. I was convinced he was probably sitting there designing rockets to space while we were talking about, some children's church song or theme. Maybe it's that way in school too, but he behaved. And I really did not want to treat him like a problem child. And when you treat these kids of preachers as problem children, and you don't know and you don't understand the pressures they're under, and how they go to school and they stand out like a sore thumb, how they don't get to participate. Maybe they do now. I've heard a lot of things. I've seen things. I can see already. You've got people who are, there's Howard Geyer in California, all happy-go-lucky, sitting at the ball game with his kids. How nice! How nice that he didn't have his minister's license taken away from him, as others were threatened to do when we were in school, and we were in the ministry. It's just, this is so cockamamie, and I really hope that anyone that would listen, anyone that's considering going to this place, can see this is NTCC. I don't care what happens out in the local churches. There are going to be a lot of preachers and their wives out in servicemen's homes especially who are going to adopt this kind of thing. And they're going to make you feel awful about your kids. Leave. Do not stay when stuff like this starts to happen. It's terrible. And this man has zero understanding of what it's really like to bring up kids in this organization, because his child was not under the constraints to get permission to try to beg to have 2 kids to come to a birthday party. None of that. None of it. So he can stand up there and have his righteous indignation all he wants. It falls flat. It's phony baloney. Plastic banana.
But this is the leadership of God. If so be that we are Christians, it is to be clean, holy, dedicated, disciplined, with strict adherence to the Word of God. So here's a question to pose today. What do you allow to defile your kingdom? What person in your family is allowed in your house to bring in the grand deception that you allow to go on? Why won't you teach them the truth and enforce it?
And with that, he has now given everyone permission to behave possibly badly to others in their family.